Hope your week is off to a good start. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about training and how to simplify the different types of training so that it's easier to manage, easier to make sure that you get done what you need to get done, and it's easier to make sure that you implement the skill development along the way. So I've received several questions about different types of workouts, and so I'm going to go through how I tend to think about the different types of workouts and how I tend to categorize them. I do this mostly to keep it simple for myself. However, if you have your own system of doing so and you really find it useful and it's helpful for you, I really encourage you to keep doing that. I'm just going to provide you with my perspective, so maybe that can help you a little bit in terms of reframing what you're doing or just offering a different perspective. If it alters it in any way, that's great. If not, no worries, keep doing what you're doing. Regardless of what you do, it's important to identify the different types of work. That way, you can start to design workouts that focus on that type of work. And in general, I try to keep workouts all pretty similar in terms of the type of work that we're doing within that workout. So for instance, we'll go into a little bit more detail what it is later, but for instance, if it's a speed workout, I try to have most of the workout geared towards that. Same thing if it's an aerobic workout, I try to have most of the sets, most of the work geared towards an aerobic workout. That way, you kind of make sure you know what you're accomplishing, you get it done, and then you can move on. Of course, you can definitely include small dosages of other goals and other types of training within a single workout. You just want to make sure that you keep the main goal the main goal. And regardless of how you characterize different types of training, and certainly in the types of training that I'm going to talk about, there's definitely overlap. And so it's not these hard black and white differences, and it's kind of a continuum between the different types of training. And it's important to keep that in mind. And while we say things kind of in black and white categories, it's mostly just so we can understand what we're talking about. Try to keep in mind that it is more of a continuum. It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray. And as long as you're clear about what you're trying to accomplish, it's all good. And just as importantly, this is just from a training standpoint, the skill development stuff. You still have to work that in. It's a little bit different, but we're just focusing on the type of training and the set structure that's going to support that type of work. And if you want specific examples of what these type of sets might look like, just take a look at my YouTube channel, specifically the shorts. I put a lot of workouts up there, and they're all labeled based upon the type of training that's being done. Same thing, you can check out the same ideas on Instagram. And lastly, on one of the first emails I sent you when you subscribe to this newsletter, there are links to the sets, and you can find them all in a Google Drive folder, so you can check that out there. The first type of set is aerobic sets. So I consider this long work. It's not particularly hard, but it's typically long. The distances are going to be longer. The total volume is going to be greater. Intensity is going to be lower. Rest periods are going to be a little bit shorter. And the intensity is controlled. It should be a sustainable effort. And so the goal here is to accumulate volume at controlled intensities with really good skills. It'll probably still be work. It might be a little bit challenging, but everything's controlled, everything's longer, and everything's smoother. And this can take all sorts of shapes and sizes, but the most important thing is, again, that you're keeping them moving for the most part. The rests aren't too extended, the intensities aren't too fast, and the distances and the total volume is longer. This type of work in a lot of ways provides a lot of support for all the other training. It provides support from a physiological standpoint, and because they get a lot of practice at slower speeds, it can provide a really great base of technical work too. One of the big challenges of this type of work is keeping it engaging from a skill perspective and also from the perspective of avoiding monotony. So while 10-300s is great from a physiological standpoint, if you can find a way to make it more engaging, turn up the skill component, swimmers are much more likely to enjoy it, and they're much more likely to do a better job from it, and they're much more likely to get more benefit from it. So while some people like to dismiss this type of work because it's not race specific, it is really important for almost all swimmers that are swimming 100 or more, and it's definitely important for all swimmers that are swimming a 200 or more. Aerobic fitness is a huge part of success in those events, and so it needs to be developed over time. So this type of work is really an investment, and it's something that you want to be doing consistently over time. And progress in aerobic work today tends to improve performance in the future. And so while it might not seem like it has a huge impact right away, making sure it's addressed and continuing to address it is going to support performance in the future. Next type of work is what I call fitness work. So while aerobic sets were long work, I consider fitness sets hard work. It's more intense than aerobic training, but it's not really race specific yet. Swimmers aren't racing. It's somewhat of a halfway point between aerobic work and race work. Another way to think about it is aerobic work with a punch. And so now you're starting to put a little bit more intensity into the aerobic stuff. It's kind of like the bridge between the two. It really builds upon what you're doing from an aerobic standpoint, and it helps to ensure swimmers are fit to perform really well during race-specific work. You're going to see a little bit shorter distances. You're definitely going to see higher intensities. However, those intensities should still be controlled. They're going to get more rest between repetitions, although the rest period should still be relatively short, and it still should be sustainable swimming, even though it's going to be more challenging swimming. What you're really trying to do is create a physical challenge and then have swimmers execute their skills during those challenges. More than any other type of training, almost anything goes from a set design perspective here, provided that the swimmers are really pushing their effort levels. So it's a really valuable way to get a lot of great work in. Again, a little bit more intensity than your aerobic stuff, but still controlled relative to the race-specific stuff. The next type of training is race sets. And so now we're doing fast work. It's higher intensity racing efforts where we're really pushing the envelope from a speed and fatigue perspective. More or less, we're practicing racing, and so speeds need to be relevant to racing efforts. And rather than focusing on heart rates and physiology, we're really practicing swimming really fast with fatigue. The focus is on performance and practicing racing situations and racing skills. You can and should focus on different events and right sets for those events. So for instance, a 100 backstroke set is going to be really different than a 400 freestyle set. It's not just doing broken swims, it's practicing the components of the races. So you want to do some sets where they practice the front end of their races without a lot of fatigue. You want to do some sets where they practice the back end of the races with a lot more fatigue. It goes beyond pace sets as well. I try to think of what swimmers have to do in races, so I give them the opportunity to practice and rehearse what they're going to experience during the sets. For instance, in an IM set, they're going to have a lot of opportunities to switch back and forth between the strokes and transition between the strokes, because that's what they have to be really good at in an IM. It's not just about pacing backstroke or pacing breaststroke. They have to be able to transition between the two as well as the other strokes, and that needs to be practiced over and over and over again. The same principle applies for different distances and different strokes. It can be tempting to put a lot of focus on this type of work, and while it is really effective, it's also important to understand that the faster and fitter your swimmers are, the more successful they're going to be with this type of work. And so that's where doing the aerobic stuff, doing the speed stuff, doing the fitness stuff, it allows them to come to these race sets a lot more prepared, and that makes those race sets a lot more effective. So you got to make sure you're doing the other types of work, or else this type of work can get stale. Last type of training, speed work. So this is really fast swimming over really short distances with a lot of rest. So typically the distances are going to be 25 meters or less, and the rest periods are going to be long, minimum 30 seconds up to a minute, even more. There's not a lot of volume. The goal is really, really fast swimming at maximal speed without any fatigue. This type of work responds really well to variability, using different training aids, using resistance, using stroke counts, doing different strokes, and even using drills to practice going really fast. You can even do kicking and pulling as well. As long as it's short and fast and not creating a lot of fatigue, they're going to improve their speed over time. This also tends to be the type of work that's often neglected. The reality is everyone needs speed. Even distance swimmers, it's still a race, and the best distance swimmers in the world are still really fast swimmers. So regardless of the event, swimmers need speed. It doesn't take a lot of work, but it needs to be done consistently over time to allow for consistent progress over time. As with aerobic work, speed training is definitely an investment in the future. So when it comes to training, just like skill development, I try to keep it simple. There's aerobic work, which is longer and at controlled intensities. There's fitness work, which is harder aerobic work. There's race-specific work, where swimmers are practicing the skills of racing. And then there's speed work, where swimmers are learning to go really, really fast. If you're looking to simplify your training, that might be a good starting point for you. So I hope that was helpful. And as always, keep it simple.